Hello and welcome to Pop Screen, part of the Geek Show podcast network. We're the corner of the Geek Show that likes to talk about movies either starring by or about pop stars, the good, the bad and the preposterous. No, the podcast does such a wide range of musical and cinematic genres, from documentaries to science fiction, from country and western to hip-hop. I'm Graham Williamson, I'm a film critic for The Geek Show and filmmaker, and I also work for the British horror website Horrified. This week I've been joined by...
Mark Cunliffe. I write for The Geek Show. I write for We Are Cults. You can find me on Letterboxd. I always run out of what I'm supposed to say when I do this. I've written a chapter in Scarred for Life Volume 2, which is available on Lulu Books. I have been on Talking Pictures podcast. I've been on this podcast. And I also have a blog called The Penny University. That's everywhere you can possibly find me.
I always prod you about the Scarred for Life thing if you forget it, because I do think that's very cool.
Yeah, I'm very chuffed with that, yeah.
Anyway, here we come again. Episode 28. And while this podcast has been running, we've done some pretty strange combinations of pop star and director. We've had a Joan Jett movie from the director of First Reformed, a Kylie Minogue movie from the director of Mauvais Sang, and a Jennifer Lopez movie from someone who is good at directing. But none are quite as weird and incongruous as this week. A Dave Clark 5 movie, clearly patterned on Richard Lester's A Hard Day's Night, from the director of that classic all-ages chuckle-fest Deliverance. This is Catch As If You Can, the first cinema film after a string of well-received TV plays and documentaries by John Boorman, and it is a rum old thing indeed.
I have to say, I don't think we're peeking too far behind the wizard's curtain with Stuart Lee here when I say that I've known about this film coming up and my participation in this podcast coming up for about 8 months, perhaps.
Yeah.
And I have had Catch As If You Can on my Sky Planner for about 2 years.
So it's a long time in the making. This is like a podcast by Terrence Malick or something.
Yeah. Because it was just one of those things that I saw on Talking Pictures and thought, oh, interesting. I must record that and watch it at some stage, just from a sense of my fascination in sort of British 60s cinema and pop, even though I know fuck all about the Dave Clark 5.
Yeah, it's the same here. I think that reaction you said is like 90% of people who watch this film will watch it because at some point they saw it and went, interesting.
Yeah.
You know, it's not the sort of thing where you think, oh my God, that's amazing. I must break down every door to find out about this. I thought the fact that John Boorman, director of Deliverance, Point Blank, The General, Hope and Glory, and Zardoz, made his debut making A Hard Day's Night knockoff with the Dave Clark 5 was, interesting.
Interesting, yeah. And I watched it finally after all that time that we've waited for this sort of thing. I watched it finally Monday night. I think you watched it Monday afternoon, didn't you? And I ended up watching it Monday night. And I was really impressed. Surprisingly, really impressed. I really enjoyed it.
I think if you could quantify nice surprises, this is probably the nicest surprise I've had on this podcast so far.
It's a very pleasant surprise, isn't it? It's not what you expect. I mean, we've just described the whole thing as sort of like a knockoff Hard Day's Night, which it is. There's no denying that. Or it's at least what the studios thought they were likely to get. What they actually get is a weird existential road movie, really, don't they?
You know what film I kept thinking of? Jean-Luc Godard's Weekend.
Yeah, it's very... And I also, reading up online, somebody drew comparisons with it to Chris Pettit's Radio On.
Oh, yeah, that's good. Yeah, I like that.
One. So these are very strange sort of bedfellows to find what is essentially a knockoff to Hard Day's Night in.
Yeah, and the setup is, I guess, kind of mischievous, although that doesn't really key you in for what's coming up because A Hard Day's Night is pretty mischievous. But the Dave Clark Five in this film are stuntmen. Like,
Yeah, which I believe he was, wasn't he?
yeah,
Although there's some confusion or controversy regarding it. He claims that he was a stuntman on hundreds of pictures.
yeah.
But people say that Internet Movie Database have only got him credited on 4 films.
Yeah, I think there's a
But
bit of inflation going on there.
there probably is a bit of inflation, but then again, Internet Movie Database aren't very well known for the huge amounts of detail or grasp of the facts, really. If they're going to make a mistake, they're going to make a mistake. So it's possible. But yeah, hundreds of films, probably not.
Yeah, but that's what they are here, and it is sort of one of those cult British movies, like I guess Oh Lucky Man, which basically exists because its star had a really weird job once. And there you go.
That's
There's
an
your
idea,
movie.
isn't it? Yeah, the
Yeah,
whole McDowell was a coffee salesman. Let's build a film around it. They've worked out
yeah,
that Dave Clark was a stuntman. Let's base a film around it.
yeah. So
And a
he's
similar odyssey as well, a similar road
yeah,
odyssey across Britain, really, isn't it?
yeah. So he's employed with his band as a stuntman for this, and I mean, I was reading Boorman's autobiography, Adventures of a Suburban Boy, which I'd just like to take a moment to shill. I think it is very underappreciated as one of the great filmmakers' autobiographies.
I've
Just a
never read it, but I'm now
wonderful
automatically
read.
mentally noting it to read. Yeah.
He says he was inspired by some adverts that were around at the time for the milk board that were just encouraging people to drink more milk. But I think the thing is that kind of nationalized industry advertisement, unless it's like an NHS public health film, is so foreign to us now that it almost feels like a kind of Repo Man satire where they're
Yeah.
advertising meat, just meat, no product, just meat.
And it's got a weird, is the tagline meat for go?
Yes.
Go for
Yeah.
meat or something. Meat for go. I suppose it's riffing on the go to work on an egg kind of thing, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
But the idea that there's a Ian Meat has decided that people need to eat more of his products.
Yes.
So Ian Meat has secured the services of a glamorous dolly bird to.
It's not the second Liam
of...
Herring reference you've got in.
Yeah.
It's good going. I think it's a record.
Well, my Letterboxd profile does, or it did used to say, "We'll try and fit a Liam Herring profile reference into pretty much anything." Yes. I can't believe I've just managed 2 there in the space of 5 minutes.
So yeah, they're advertising meat with Barbara Ferry.
Yeah.
This was she never quite sort of broke through to the big leagues, although she is a lot of fun in here. It was going to be Marianne Faithfull for a while.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
She turned it down. She said it was too, like, she wasn't really going for a pop image. And I think fair enough, because when Marianne Faithfull did turn up in a film a year afterwards, it was Jean-Luc Godard's Made in USA, which...
completely different. Even though we've just mentioned Godard and Weekend, but it is...
Well, yeah, that's the thing. The gap between
it is a
them
leap, isn't it?
It's not as much of a gap, maybe, as Faithfull thought, but I can understand on paper how it didn't...
Yeah,
seem like
you're not seeing what the director's intending on in the script form. You're just thinking, here's a film about, the second tier Beatles.
Yeah.
I suppose so. It's not gonna. I mean, that's it. I mean, I don't really know a lot about the Dave Clark Five, but they do seem very middle of the table in
I was
pop and rock Premier League.
I was thinking about this because one of the interesting sub-threads through my life enjoying pop music has been the mutability of how the 60s were remembered. Like, I remember when Lou Reed died, And suddenly it turned out that the Velvet Underground, who I'd grown up thinking were an important but commercially negligible band, were actually really popular, and every opinion columnist bought White Light, White Heat as soon as it came out. So the memory is being rewritten a bit. And I remember when I was young, it was very normal for packages of like 1960s nostalgia, the sort of Top of the Pops 2 thing, if they had a 60s theme week, would have Freddie and the Dreamers and the Dave Clark Five and Manfred Mann and Herman's Hermits rubbing shoulders with all of the elite here. And over time, that's kind of been scrubbed out of the popular memory, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think it has. Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting one, isn't it? And it's one I've been laughing about recently on Call the Midwife. You didn't expect that reference, did you, to drop in as well with Lee and Herring? But Call the Midwife is now at this weird stage. It's been going for like 10 years. So I think it's about 66 or 6. No, 66, because we've just had the World Cup, I believe.
Right.
So it's at that weird stage now where it's in the middle of the swinging 60s. But the BBC clearly don't have the rights to the Beatles.
Yeah.
Or the Stones. So every sort of soundtrack per episode is like Jerry and the Pacemakers. It's like there's this weird alternative 60s where everything happened in the 60s, but these people clearly never really cared for the Beatles or the Stones. They're all listening to Jerry and the Pacemakers and Herman's Hermits instead.
Which in a weird way is a more realistic picture, isn't it? The sort of the coolness of the 60s has not quite set in yet. It's not that thing that I was talking about where people in retrospect say they were listening to all of the hip groundbreaking bands of the 60s.
It does make you wonder if it takes a couple of years after something has ended for people to go, that was the best of the era, you know, rather than just, I mean, I'm not saying that nobody around in the 60s would have looked at the Beatles and gone, yeah, they're all right, I suppose. Yeah. You know, although there are probably some people who did say that, who, you know, to this day the Beatles aren't their cup of tea. But it's whether the weight that we now associate with bands like the Beatles and the Stones were there in that contemporary moment.
Yeah. Because Andrew Lou Golden, the Stones manager, said that the Beatles never saw the Stones as their great rivals. The Beatles thought the Dave Clark Five were probably the ones that were nipping at their heels.
That's interesting, isn't it? Yeah.
And for a while, he was right.
Yeah, I mean, this very film proves that, doesn't it? I mean, nobody got a Stones film off the ground, really, did they? So it's...
I mean, performance, but I don't think that's exactly what they were looking for.
That's not going to factor in, is it?
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. And I think when I looked back at their music here, I could sort of understand why they've fallen a bit from the popular memory, but it is the sort of thing that you can only understand in retrospect, which is that you were listening to stuff here which is often very old style 50s rock and roll. Having a Wild Weekend, which was the title of the film in the States, is it's the sort of thing that absolutely could have been recorded by Ike Turner or Chuck Berry. And, you know, that's no diss. I like that music.
Yeah.
You also think, okay, but in the same year, the Beatles were releasing Rubber Soul, and 1 year later, the Beach Boys released Pet Sounds. You are about to be left behind.
Yeah, absolutely. But interestingly enough, I do think that what is established here, a band as big and as influential and as pioneering as the Beatles, did sort of take from as well. Because if you look at the sort of road genre that this film has, the Beatles end up replicating it a couple of years later with Magical Mystery Tour.
They do, yeah, and so not as successfully as well.
Not as successfully, no. Weirdly enough, no. I mean, people will probably still, if you say Magical Mystery Tour, people will probably still remember it or have seen it. Whereas if you say Catch It If You Can, they won't. But successfully on the screen, this has definitely got it far more than the Beatles had.
Definitely. And I mean, I don't mind Magical Mystery Tour, but I don't think it's unfair to say that if it was a second tier band doing that, it would be completely forgotten by history.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
It is the cultural weight of the Beatles that drags that to the surface, and it's the sort of cultural fading, I guess, of the Dave Clark Five that means this very, very good film is not remembered.
Yeah. Whereas a Folly from the Beatles, you give it a bit of a benefit of the doubt, don't you? You see it in terms of where the band were at that time. With everybody going off in different strands, Paul pretty much leading the band, and George not really being particularly arsed. It's all yes. in there, isn't it?
Yeah. So how would you? This is an interesting thing, because this is one of those films that would later become the template for something like the Monkees, where the band of a bunch of friends who all live in the same house. The depiction of them living in the same house is I couldn't put my finger on it, but it's kind of odd. It's not quite as innocent as the Monkees TV series, in my view.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah. The one that came to mind, I mean, obviously the Monkees is an obvious one. Because it's set in the template that they will then follow. But as you say, the way that it's shot, and whether it's that mix of ennui that the film possesses, or the existentialness of it, it just seems a little bit cynical, a bit dark, it's not happy-go-lucky. It's not even the Beatles in Help, is it? Where they all have that big street to themselves and they all open the door and it's all one house knocked through.
Yeah.
It's not even that kind of zany Marx Brothers type thing. There's something it's a bit slightly off about it, isn't it?
Grubbier, a bit studentier, like you can... Yeah. There's obviously always girls in these movies, but you can imagine this version of the Dave Clark Five bragging about getting laid in a way that you can't imagine the Beatles of A Hard Day's Night ever doing.
Or that as they're making the Snap, Crackle and Pop, which they didn't seem to be allowed to mention, did they?
Noisy cereal, yes.
Noisy cereal. The noisy cereal. You can imagine as they're making that, there might be the odd groupie upstairs in the bedroom still.
Yeah.
There's that vibe about it, isn't there? The one that it came to mind as I was watching, I was thinking, it's one of those where they all live in a house together kind of thing, which is, like you say, it's a common template for these films now. But the one that kept coming back to me was the film The Touchables, which is a wonderfully weird late 60s film. I think it's 69, I think it is, with Judy Huxtable, Peter Cook's second wife.
Yes. And
that's a bunch of girls who live in like a really... It would be the kind of home that now that Kevin MacLeod would be banging on about on Channel 4. There's this massive bubble in the forest, and they're in this bubble in the forest, and there's like... what do you call them? Pinball machines. There's a Madame Tussauds of Michael Caine and a Madame Tussauds of Alfred Hitchcock in there.
Well, it's not my kind of house, but for the people who just spunked their life savings on it.
It would be on Kevin MacLeod's thing now. Not that I ever watched that, which is why I kind of think what it's called. I just know that guy's name.
Yes.
But yeah, it's a bubble in the forest. And there's like a goat outside which they milk to get the milk. It's very strange.
It sounds worryingly Manson family.
This is where it gets even weirder, because they then kidnap a pop star, a male pop star, and sort of like hold him hostage, and it's alluded sex slave in the bubble in the forest kind of thing. It's not as dark as that. But you do get the sense that they do appear less squeaky clean and a little bit more slightly knowing in the performance than perhaps I think Lester allowed the Beatles.
There's a storytelling reason for that. I'm sure it's like how Dave Clark wanted to be seen. Like, I'm sure that if you went up to him and said, would you like to be seen as the more grown-up, sexier version of the Beatles? It's like, yeah, I'd also like to be seen as the more professional, influential version of Jesus while you're at it. But
there's much made of his saturnine good looks, isn't there?
Yeah. Which I think is
looks
fair enough, actually.
It's very much fair enough, yeah.
Yeah.
He looks like Action Man. He's got that kind of There's one scene where he literally, I think it might be when they meet the hippies, we're jumping ahead of ourselves, but there's one scene where his eyes move around. It's like, do your eagle eyes, Steve? Do your eagle eyes?
Well, there's a lovely quote about him in Boorman's book. I must say, Boorman seems to like this film a little less than I do, although he is very harsh on some of his earlier work in general.
I suppose you would be, yeah.
But he says, inevitably, I was having problems getting a performance from Dave. I cut his dialogue to the bare minimum. I had to play him silent and taciturn. Often this came off as sullen. There was nothing light-hearted about him, nothing youthful, nothing graceful or rhythmical. And this is a drummer.
Do you know, the funny thing is, like I say, I know nothing about the group other than the odd song.
Yeah.
But when it come on, I think his first shot is he hitting a punch bag or he's doing something.
Oh yeah.
He's doing some kind of exercise, isn't he? In a kind of gym bunny type, not just running or like that. It's something a bit masculine, isn't it? And I thought, oh, that's him. That's Dave Clark. And I thought, yeah, he does look like a copper, doesn't he? Because I genuinely thought for a minute that he was the copper who was at Eddie Cochran's fatal crash. But it's the wrong Dave, isn't it? That was Dave D.
Oh, right. I didn't know that.
Dave D was the special constable, apparently, who was, I think he might have been first on the scene at the crash that killed Eddie Cochran.
I didn't know that, but the otherwise perplexing use of a Dave D. Dozy Beaky Mick and Titch track over a car crash in Quentin Tarantino's Death Proof makes a bit more sense now.
Yeah. Although the fact that the character doesn't know how to pronounce the name Titch always pisses me off in that film.
It's such a wonderful American moment, that though, isn't it? Because it was Kurt Russell sort of growling about this really obscure British beat band. These founders, yeah, I know them. My dad used to listen to them. What are you on about? It's lovely.
But yeah, it is interesting that might have been tapped into because obviously Tarantino's got that massive head for stuff like that. So he probably
absolutely
does know about it. Yeah. But I did genuinely think that he was, because he looks like you. I mean, it's the old saying, isn't it? Would you let your daughter go out with a Rolling Stone?
Yeah.
And I imagine if your daughter brought Dave Clark home, your parents would be quite pleased. He's not going to upset Dad with his pipe and slippers, really, is he? They're going to think, oh, that's a good, upstanding gentleman.
I think, yeah. I mean, he's not Jagger. He's certainly not Lou Reed. I'll give you that. But
yeah, and as Bowman says in that book as well, he's not. There's nothing youthful about him, is there? He's a very good-looking youth. Don't get me wrong, but he hasn't got that sort of 60s sensibility that, say, John Lennon or Paul McCartney would have in those films.
But there is, I think, something effectively brooding about him, which might just be, as Boorman says, the fact that he, couldn't get him to emote successfully. But
I think it works, whether it's a case that he couldn't do it or what. It works because it helps that sort of existential angle, really. I mean, if A Hard Day's Night is about four lads who don't really want to be in a TV studio for the day but feel that they have to, then this film just seems to be about, I mean, it is the same thing. It is a getaway. It's, I don't want to film this advert. Let's go off with my boyfriend. But the idea that they're constantly dreaming of this other life, this desert island.
Yeah.
And at the conclusion, it's not there because it could never be there. There's something really quite melancholic about it, which fits his performance style, really.
It's very odd because in a couple of years' time, this sort of thing would be de rigueur. There are a lot of late 60s films that are explicitly saying, look, this promised utopia that the hippies have set us on the route for is never going to arrive. But this is 1965, which is astonishingly early to be pissing on everyone's cornflakes like this.
Absolutely. This isn't the era of the party's over, come down of like that you expect to see in 69, 70 or something like that. This is very much, as you say, this is the bit where we're all supposed to be going, ooh, shaking our heads.
Yeah, this is the party. Yeah.
Let's do the show right here,
Yeah. So that's really interesting, I think. Yeah.
I think it does work. I think it really works for him. Because it's almost like he's a guy who knows that the pipe dream that they have is a pipe dream. That you're going to go back to the 9 to 5. You're going to go back to the routine that you, even though they're in privileged positions, I mean, she's a model and he's a stuntman. They're not, they're not hewing coal out the ground.
No.
But the whole thing of the drudgery, and again, I suppose that ties in with the idea at the time of how easy it was to manipulate the youth market. It's pointing the finger at the management, isn't it?
Yeah, that becomes a massive, massive theme in it. And I think that's what makes, as you say, it is kind of a Lovers on the Run movie, which I love, but it's not a Lovers on the Run movie like Breathless, where it's like a little girl with an overbearing, abusive father and a guy who works the bins. It's two people who do really desirable jobs.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
But I think you root for them to escape because they are involved in this industry that is fraudulent and cynical.
You do. You kind of think, well, they should have their youth. Their youth is being taken from them and marketed to other youths as the thing to be.
To sell
and they're
meat.
Not getting any. To sell meat for Ian Meat. From the people who brought you spam.
The latest from Food Co.
It is so They Live, isn't it? Or,
yeah.
Repo Man, it is so full on like that.
Yeah, you have these cutaways too to the advertising executives who are really interesting. One of them is a young Ronald Lacey who would go on to play Tote in Raiders of the Lost Ark.
No. Ronald Lacey's the hippie.
Is he?
Yeah, the utterly zonked out hippie slumped in the chair in is it Salisbury Plain in the village?
Shit.
That's Ronald Lacey, yeah. The executives are the one who's chasing them is Clive Swift.
Yes,
Keeping Up Appearances, Clive Swift.
Yeah.
The ones in the boardroom are Hugh Walters,
right,
who did a lot of cult sort of TV. He was in Survivors, the first series. He's the one in the wheelchair.
Yeah,
he was Eleanor Bron's second banana to Eleanor Bron in Resurrection of the Daleks.
Oh yeah, which also has Clive Swift in, doesn't it?
Which, yes, it does. Yeah, it's Mr. Enjoyable. Yeah,
reunion. Yeah.
But the main man is Jewish actor David DeKeyser, who only passed away this year, I think.
Right.
He lived to a ripe old age, I think. Yeah, he passed away this year.
Well, his character was important to Boorman because Boorman did this. He did this, and his screenwriter did this. I'll just get the screenwriter's name. It was Peter Nichols.
Peter Nichols, who wrote Day in the Death of Joe Egg.
Well, that's the thing. Both Boorman and Nichols did this because they were working on passion projects that no one else wanted to make, and they needed the clout. And Nichols' was A Day in the Death of Joe Egg, so, it worked perfectly for him. But Boorman's never got made. Boorman wanted to make an adaptation of A Glastonbury Romance by John Cowper Powys.
All right.
Never got off the ground, although a lot of the research he did for it ended up in Excalibur much later.
Yeah, I could imagine, yeah.
And he said that to him, the advertising executive was kind of a Merlin figure, that he's someone who can see this action happening and rewrite what it means and how people perceive it.
Fascinating, yeah. And again, you see, not the kind of depth of character you expect in a throwaway tie-in pop music. You know, the idea that this bubble could burst any minute. You know, just throw a band at a screen, have them sing a few songs, and fuck off. There's none of that in this film at all, is there?
Yeah. I mean, even the music is used interestingly, because I expected, as with A Hard Day's Night, as with all of A Hard Day's Nights, many imitators, that you're going to have scenes of the Dave Clark Five, like singing in a TV studio, or at least playing their instruments. But of course, they're all playing stuntmen, so this never happens. The music is used, but it's used in the way that a pop song would be used, just playing on the soundtrack.
It's just in the background, isn't it? It's important to point out, because I don't think we have yet, that it's also a film where Dave Clark isn't playing Dave Clark, is he? He's playing a guy called Steve.
Yeah.
Which, threw me straight away, because I'm thinking, that's Dave. So that's Dave Clark. Then somebody called him Steve. I thought, oh, right. It's not Dave Clark. Maybe it's the other guy that's Dave Clark. And let's face it, I don't know any of the names. I was literally resorted to call them, you know, Sleepy, Dopey, Bashful, Doc and Dave
Sporty,
Clark.
Ginger, yeah.
Although I found it
definitely sporty.
Definitely with his... on the punch bag. I found it interesting that there's the one of them who never speaks. It always seems to be the process of saying something.
Now, I looked this up. Yeah, that's Lenny Davidson, the guitarist. I don't know if that was like because he was even worse with dialogue than Dave, but it does seem to be deliberate, because there is a joke that lampshades it where they go to the costume party and his costume is Harpo Marx, the non-speaking member of the Marx Brothers.
Utterly beautiful little thing, because you sit there. I imagine if that was your, again, like you say, commodities of Ginger Sporty, if that was your favourite in the group and you're watching that film, you're like, he's not saying anything. He's not saying anything. That's why he's not saying anything. It's quite clever, that. Yeah, really clever.
So they go on this road trip and they end up, as you say, at this thing in, I think it's a village called Imber, which is one of those villages that was evacuated during World War II and was never repopulated and is now used as an army training ground. I say now, actually. I don't know if it's now, but I know that when Boorman did his service in World War II, he went to Imber to train, and he filed it away as somewhere that would be good for a movie at some point.
Brilliant. It's one of those places that I automatically get really fascinated by, because it to me, it reminds me of like episodes of Doom Watch or something like that. They always seem to be, there's this abandoned village that, or like the New Avengers or something, you know, those fake villages in the middle of nowhere. They're just really fascinating stuff.
And people
populated by hippies.
People don't really know these places exist now. I think when people think about ruins, they're normally thinking about something very urban, you know, something that's been left behind by industry. But this is a wartime phenomenon, and a lot of them still do exist out in like the real wilds of the British countryside.
Just fascinating little pockets and corners of the world that we, well, not the world, the land that we don't really tend to consider, but they are there. Yeah.
So as you say, this is now occupied by a group of hippies, including, as you say, Ronald Lacey. I think I misidentified him, because I just cannot imagine Ronald Lacey being young at any point.
Young. Well, even there, he doesn't look young, really. No. He's got this, I don't know if it's his hair or a wig, but it's like, and he just looks like, he does look like one of the Seven Dwarfs that have just dopey, sleazy Doc and acid flashback.
I'd never really thought about that hair before, but it's true, isn't it? That's what Danny the dealer was talking about in With Nail and I was, they're selling hippie wigs in Woolworths, man.
Yeah, I've been treated over this, but yeah, he never seemed young, Ronald Lacey, bless him. I think he's in the very first episode of Randall and Hopkirk Deceased, and he's playing like a Ted. but he looks really old there as well.
But yeah, that is sort of fitting, because this is not a hippie scene that's about youth and rebellion and peace and joy. It's a very dark scene indeed.
It's dark, nihilistic, and they point out how different they are as well, don't they? When it's a wonderful clash of youth culture, really, all in one tiny scene. Because I think they describe them as a bunch of beats. And Sheila Fern, who a link to Hard Day's Night, because Sheila Fern was in Hard Day's Night.
Oh, right.
And she would later go on, or well, no, I wouldn't say later, because she's probably at the same time. She was Terry Collier's sister in The Likely Lads.
Right.
And then returned in Whatever Happened to the Likely Lads as Terry Collier's sister, married to Ronald Lacey.
No.
Yeah. Her character was married to Ronald Lacey.
Was there like only 5 actors in Britain at this point?
I think there must have been. Yeah, I think there must have been. But yeah, I sat up when I saw, oh, it's Sheila Fern, because I used to love her in Likely Lads. And she does sort of like spin on her heel when she hears themselves described as beats. And she's like, we're not beats, beatniks. We're something else. It's really weird. It is a bit Manson, isn't it?
It is,
really
yeah. And I
odd.
wondered whether watching this, because this touches what at the time was like the third rail of youth culture films, in that it talks a lot about drugs. A Hard Day's Night does not have that. There's that one little gag where John Lennon sort of snorts a Coke bottle. Yeah, but most of them just do not mention the massive quantities of drugs that were being taken at this point. And I wondered whether, did this get passed because the British censors didn't know what, say, horse meant?
It's weird. We're used to hearing stuff anyway, but when you watch it again, a throwaway, this could last all of 5 minutes, disposable pop movie. Somebody goes, have you got any horse? That is just not what you expect to hear.
Absolutely,
this.
yeah.
In performance, yeah. A few years later, performance could be riddled with horses. It's like the Grand National. There's that many. But not in a Dave Clark 5 movie.
God, no.
Just even saying it just doesn't sound right, does it? Who first introduced the teenage market to heroin? Dave Clark 5.
Yes, yeah.
Should put a disclaimer up there. Dave Clark 5, no, he has never taken drugs to our knowledge.
Well, according to the film, he hasn't, because he really looks disgusted when they start talking about that.
His body is a temple as a stuntman.
Yeah. But even bringing it up to knock it back is a step further than you expect from this era.
Yeah, it's very. It surprises you in how modern it can be, or how prescient it can be. Like I say, there's something a bit Manson about that group.
Definitely.
And there's something really off about that scene again. If you think the house setup of the band Stuntmen is a bit off, in the sense that, like you say, these are people who probably do shag,
Yeah.
They're not eunuchs. They're not got Ken parts down below. They look like they shag.
I should mention this. They have a wetsuit on the wall, and although that does become plot relevant, it just hangs there ominously at the start. And you think, what are these guys into?
It is a bit Cynthia Payne, isn't it?
Juliet Bravo! If you get that, listeners, please award yourself a gold star, because that's
that's a good reference. It's all about references. See, listeners, we know fuck all about the Dave Clark 5, but we just throw in any reference we can, throw anything else into it. If you've come here thinking at last somebody's going to talk about the Dave Clark 5 and their place in musical history, you're shit out of luck here.
We're so sorry. Yeah.
And I haven't even done the Birmingham 6 Guildford 4 joke yet, which I'm sure everybody thinks is going to happen.
But after we've had the drugs with these sort of squatters, these hippies.
So is this something we're going to do later? After we've had the drugs, Mark?
So yeah, once the podcast is over. But you've had that scene, and then you move on to the sex with Eutha Joyce. And it's like, my notes at this point say, Dave Clark is now playing Louis Theroux and Eutha Joyce is Christine Hamilton.
Yeah. Well, Robin Bailey is... Oh, I loved Robin Bailey. I loved him for years. In there's a wonderful North Country comedy called I Didn't Know You Cared, which was written by Peter Tinnerswood, and he plays this wonderful doer, old-style Yorkshireman called Uncle Mort. And it's totally against type than what you see in this and other things he was in, because he was very urbane-looking gentleman, very posh, and he is in this as well, isn't he? But as Uncle Mort, he had a flat cap, a World War One pin badge, a silk scarf around his neck, and a moustache, and very bloody kids, this kind of attitude. But yeah, I did love him in that, and he's quite sleazy in this, isn't he? He's looking at Barbara Ferris through the keyhole while she's having a bath.
Yes,
something you couldn't put in a film now.
They play Guy and Nan, who introduce themselves with this lovely line. They say, "We're an old married couple," which is so on the nose that you immediately know they are not what they seem.
Suddenly we've entered, like you say, Louis Theroux or Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf.
Yes.
It's a weird battle of wills between them both, isn't it? As to who's going to pull who's going to pull the young person first. And even the names, Guy and Nan just sound, it's just spot on for that kind of characterization. It's just spot on. That is clearly Peter Nichols.
Yeah.
That is absolutely Peter Nichols type of writing and humor. That kind of, it one-ups Eightborn. It goes a little bit darker than it's like a traditional Eightborn setup, but there's pampas grass in the garden. It's the
yes,
it's the Good Life analogy, isn't it? What if the Good Life was swingers? It's that kind of Markham and Jerry setup.
And a lot of the British theatre around this time had that kind of tension. I mean, Pinter is the obvious example.
Pinter, Osborne,
yeah,
and Joe Orton, of course, as well.
Yeah,
Joe Orton, probably the biggest one, isn't he? Really,
yeah.
when you think of entertaining Mr. Sloan and stuff like that.
Ferris has a bit of a link to the cutting edge of theatre as well, because she was in the original production of Edward Bond's Saved.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
She's one of those, like you said earlier on at the start of the podcast, she's one of those who never really seemed to blossom in terms of the popular film consensus. But it's a name that you hear and you kind of like, if you hear the name, you go, oh, that name's familiar. Then you might see her and you go, oh, yeah, I know that person. She was in X, Y, Z. But it's very hard to try and, it's like knitting fog, trying to sort of fit her in the popular consensus, really.
I think she was unfortunate in that she had a similar kind of look to a lot of actors who were on the way up at this time. She does look quite a lot like Carol White, but she's a very different actress, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I know what you mean. Though there's the kind of Julie Christie, Susie Kendall, the blonde, bubbly-looking girl sort of thing. Yeah. And it's not like Carol White, who's like the antithesis of Julie Christie. She's like the working class Julie Christie.
Yeah.
Barbara Ferris doesn't seem to have that. She doesn't seem to have something to mark herself out from the herd, really.
Yeah.
To sort of say, well, I'm this type of, I look like this, but I offer this. This is my unique selling point into this situation. But that's not to detract from the fact that it's a really good performance.
It is. I think if she'd have been born in some European country, some continental country, you would have seen her work with Antonioni or someone like that, because she is very good at playing blankness here in a way that lets you know that there is actually a lot going on beneath the surface.
Yeah. In a way that slight contrast to Dave Clark, who just like you say, looks blank, but it does work at least.
Yeah.
Because she seems to be it's her who's motivating it, isn't it, really? It's
Yeah.
her who's sort of like, I've got to get away. And he's like, yeah, all right, then hop in the E-Type and off we go kind of thing. But it's her who's the island, the dream, all that sort of stuff seems to be coming from her, even if, and that blankness works because, like you say, it's like, well, what's the next bit in your plan? And it probably isn't there, really.
And that's part of what I like about Lovers on the Run movies in general. I sometimes have to explain what I'm talking about when I talk about this. I've had some people blank me. Lovers on the Run movies, movies where lovers go on the run. But I like that there is this popular genre, and it is popular every sort of 20 or 30 years. It comes back round, and there's something like, Breathless or Bonnie and Clyde or Natural Born Killers, which makes it current again. There is this popular genre, which is kind of an existential death trip. It's quite a weird thing to have as a sexy, marketable thing for like kids.
It's an interesting offshoot of, I suppose it's an offshoot of noir, really, isn't it?
Yeah, the original cycle kind of comes in with Fritz Lang's You Only Live Once and Gun Crazy and all those movies.
Gun Crazy is a cracking film, yeah.
Oh, it's so good.
It's that, I mean, if noir was the setup of, I think it was Matthew Sweet who once said it's and I've cribbed it mercilessly ever since, it's the dame with a past and the guy with no future. That's your noir setup.
Yeah.
I think Lovers on the Run setup, they've both got no future, really. And then it's just a free-for-all as to which one can scrabble out the tiny existence that they might get off the back of it, which I suppose the pinnacle of it is Badlands, really, isn't it?
Completely, yeah, because the horizons in that are so low and everything is so like bitterly ironic in that movie. Yeah.
Even down to the narration is just fantastic. Yeah. Different film. We're not discussing that one, unfortunately. Nor are we discussing. See, we could have carried on with Lovers on the Run in music. Who we could be now watching Badlands with the Ting Tings, couldn't we?
Well, it's funny because there was one recently that had a music connection, which was Melina Matsoukas' Queen and Slim. And Melina Matsoukas had done a lot of videos with Beyonce, so she got a gorgeous soundtrack together.
Very good film. Yeah.
I thought it was too. A lot of people didn't like it, and I think part of the reason to bring it back round is that kind of nihilism. I think that, if you are watching Queen and Slim as a movie about the African American experience, it's probably crushing. You probably do find it unjustly, unreasonably bleak. But when you have genre expectations of it, like I knew it wasn't going to end well because these movies never end well. So I'm more interested in how the politics and the modernity fit around that plot skeleton.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think you're bang on. I also think it had the expectation of people went, oh, it's like Get Out Mark II, isn't it? Because
Daniel Kaluuya is in it.
Yeah, it was in it. So that brought a weight of expectation to it as well, didn't it? But visually, very striking film.
Absolutely, yeah.
The whole scenes with the horses and what have you, it's incredible visual film, yeah.
And I still listen to that soundtrack a lot. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful soundtrack.
Yeah,
it's got everything from Lionel Richie to Megan Thee Stallion on there. It's a great
that's
mix.
True, yeah. It's a perfect marriage of sort of the aesthetic of looks and the score, really.
Yeah.
It's very good, yeah.
Before we move on from Catch Us If You Can, though, which, spoiler warning, we liked it. We think you should definitely watch it, listeners.
Absolutely. A very pleasant surprise.
Yeah. But we should talk about two things. Firstly, the legacy of Eutha Joyce's Nan in this, which I'm sure you know about.
Oh, I don't know. Oh, yes, I do. Yes, the Smiths.
Yeah. The cover of Ask and the cover of Some Girls Are Bigger Than Others, which was a single in Germany but not in the UK, had images of Eutha Joyce from this movie on the cover.
Yeah, yeah. Which is just once again shows that he might have a lot of flaws in his character, Morrissey. He really fucking does. But he knows his films.
Absolutely, yeah.
He knows his 1950s, 1960s films.
If he would like move on from music and just like be the programmer at some repertory theatre somewhere, that would be great. I'd have no complaints.
Be nice, wouldn't it?
Then.
Yeah. But he's probably not going to show anything with with much in the way of diversity. Is he?
I'm not holding my breath for him to put Queen and Slim on. I'll put it that way.
No. I don't even think he put Flame in the Streets on, to be honest.
Yes, yeah. But that is interesting, and I found myself like I'd not watched much of Eutha Joyce's work because a lot of it was television based. A lot of it was it George and Mildred, the sitcom?
Man About the House, George and Mildred. Yeah,
That's it,
Man About the House is the original. Then George and Mildred was the spin-off featuring the characters, her and Brian Murphy's characters. Yeah, but she did do some very interesting sort of kitchen sink movies. Like The Pumpkin Eater. She's in The Pumpkin Eater, which is an interesting one. And there's some others. And normally you come to me for kitchen sink info, and I am currently hitting a blank, even though I know there's things. I'm looking on my phone now to see what I can find of her, even though I know there's things I've definitely seen her in, other than George and Mildred.
But this film does, I think, capture part of what an odd screen persona she had in the middle of this like British film and cinema scene, which is obsessed with youth and does not have much time for, selling things to different generations. There are no cross-generational films at this point. There is too much of a generational schism. And Eutha Joyce seems to hop weirdly between playing sort of fussy sitcom matriarchs and dangerous, sexy working class firebrands in a way that suggests that division isn't there somehow.
Yeah, it kind of carries through a bit with Man About the House when she played Mildred as well, because there's a sense of frustration that the permissive society passed her by because of a generation. Yeah. She's at that awkward generation bit. She's probably like a war, well, probably just before the war or a war baby, perhaps. But so it's just missed. The 60s just kind of missed her, and you get that sense of that frustration. But she's still a young woman to a certain extent, to all extents and purposes, she's a young woman, but she's not the young woman that David Keyes as marketing man will be channeling all his attentions towards. She was in quite a few kitchen sinks, Sparrows Can't Sing, A Place to Go, Charlie Bubbles. And I knew there's one I could think of. It was Charlie Bubbles. Yeah. She was also in A Man for All Seasons.
Sparrows Can't Sing also had Barbara Ferris in as well.
Yes. Yeah. See, we're all catching up, aren't it? It all sort of rolls into, again, like you're saying, there's probably about 5 actors that were working at the time.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk about that. And the other thing that I think we have to talk about, which we've already talked about a bit, but Boorman himself is, I think, such a fascinating person.
Yeah, he really is. Yeah. He, it's interesting. You could, if you were to look at people who did make these type of films, one that came to mind when I was watching it was like Michael Winner. Got to do Billy Fury's first film. I can't remember what it was called now. And that is your basic, let's do the show right here type of thing. It's not worth mentioning in the same breath as A Hard Day's Night. A Hard Day's Night takes the piss out of those type of films.
Yeah.
They have to get to Europe to perform in some sort of contest, but the plane is fog bound. So they just sort of like mooch around like the airport playing songs. You know, it's that's the kind
yeah.
of level that you're operating in there. There's no sense that, other than it being very cheap to look at, there's no sense that has got an auteur's fingertips on it in the way that, I mean, it's cheap, it's quick, which I suppose you can sum up any Michael Winner film as cheap and quick, but there's no trademark Michael Winner thing in that film to actually say, oh, that's a Michael Winner film. You know, as much as I hate Michael Winner films, at least you could identify that's a Michael Winner film. There isn't in that, because it is just a job for hire for him, really, I guess. They've gone, will you make this film with a pop group? Yes, I will. Aim the camera at them, job done. This is very, very different. This has got Bowman's fingertips all over it, because, I mean, you wouldn't, other than the fact that he directed this and Point Break, and it was what, is it Point Blank? Point Break is fucking Patrick Swayze, isn't it?
Yes.
Johnny Utah, Jesus. Now, other than that he directed this, other than he directed this and Point Blank, and that both films were one after the other, you wouldn't put them together, really, would you?
No, and I think part of that is generic, because even when he's doing Point Blank, which I think is a masterpiece, by the way, I won't hear anything bad said about it, but he still came on board that in a similar way to how he came on board this, which is that, you know, he wanted to make this time-hopping epic about Merlin, and someone said, John, I've got this genre picture for you. And he thought, well, that sounds shit, but I'll do it anyway.
I'll give it a go,
yeah.
But on paper, it doesn't look like there's no way that those two would have a logical thing to it, other than the fact that it's the same filmmaker involved in it, and it's in two consecutive films. But there really is, because it's the whole existential thing that is in there. It's in both films, and you wouldn't expect to see it in a throwaway pop movie.
Completely.
But that whole sense of French New Wave, that kind of European sensibility, is in both of those films, and he is a very existential filmmaker.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think that's the one tenet you can take from all of his films, is a sense of existentialism throughout all of them.
I think that around this time, around the mid-60s, it starts to become possible to tell the directors who have actually watched Fellini and Godard, and those who were getting it secondhand off Richard Lester and people like that, and Boorman has always been the real deal. He's a very sincere intellectual with a personal set of themes.
Yeah. And just a fantastic filmmaker. I mean, we could spend a whole podcast just discussing. I mean, filmmakers would give the right out to have just one of his films in the catalogue of work, really, isn't it? But he's got them all. It's just
the general Deliverance.
The idea that you can go from like Point Blank, Deliverance, Excalibur. It's just, but the common thread being a sort of existential angst, or a sense of identity, or a sense of things not really panning out the way that you'd expect things to pan out.
He's a guy who, I know auteurism is really unfashionable, but he's one of those directors like David Cronenberg who makes it worthwhile, because as soon as you key into his worldview, you will never dislike one of his films, because you will see so much of his personality in there. I mean, about 5 years ago, I watched Zardoz, which I was honestly expecting was going to be a kitsch disaster. Yes, I've seen that picture of Sean Connery in the nappy. I've heard that clip of the Stonehead shouting about penises. And I watched it and I thought, I mean, it's no Point Blank, but this isn't bad. There's some really good stuff going on in here.
Even a film that he's largely slated for, it's still got some incredible themes and ideas and presentation to it. Absolutely, yeah. I do wonder how much the existential side of him comes from the fact that he's such a man shaped by war, really, isn't he?
Yeah.
As we see in Land of Hope and Glory, he's it's basically cinematic memoir, really, isn't it?
Essentially, yeah.
That to be born as a war baby and then to sort of live through war and then to be called up to go and fight in Korea as well. It's like your entire formative years are shaped by conflict.
Yeah.
That you're going to have that kind of worldview, aren't you? That,
and
things aren't really as you expect.
Yeah, and you see it in all of his films. Deliverance, in a way, is prior to Apocalypse Now, is the best Vietnam War movie, even though it doesn't take place in Vietnam. And when he was making Point Blank, I think part of the reason why that is so good is because Lee Marvin really opened up to him about his wartime experiences and the guilt he felt over killing, and that makes it into the film.
Which they then capitalized on with
Hell in the Pacific.
Hell in the Pacific. Couldn't think of the name of it then. Yeah. Fascinating filmmaker. Although the last film he did was absolutely dreadful.
Oh, was that Queen and Country thing?
Yeah, a very belated sequel to Land of Hope and Glory.
Yeah.
Is it called Land of Hope and Glory or just Hope and Glory?
I think it's just Hope and Glory, yeah.
A very belated sequel to that. When you think 30 years have passed and they're trying to convince you that 6 years have passed.
Yeah.
And you got David Heyman in a very bad wig.
Oh, man. Yeah.
It's not a good film at all.
Well, let's end with an anecdote from Adventures of a Suburban Boy, his autobiography, which I think is one of my favourite filmmaking anecdotes. That when Boorman was working in television, he was part of ITV. He was at a very low position, but he was involved in ITV when that launched, and he met Lou Grade, the channel's controller, several times. And his memory of Lou Grade in his autobiography is that Lou Grade was a very belligerent man. He was the nearest thing British television's ever had to one of those old-style movie moguls in a lot of ways. But he was also very sort of sensitive to criticism. And the criticism of ITV, which was Britain's first independent broadcaster outside of the state-funded BBC, was that it was lowbrow, it was cheap, it was full of adverts, it was catering to the dumbest, basest aspects in the British cultural taste. So Grade decided to go all out in combating that. And he went all out in a way that Boorman says is still really flashy and showman-like. But he said that he is clearing 3 hours of the schedule to broadcast the Royal Shakespeare Company's latest production of Hamlet live on ITV with no adverts whatsoever. And he puts it on. And as anyone who's ever seen an uncut folio version of Hamlet knows, you're not going to get it into 3 hours. It starts to overrun and overrun and overrun and overrun. And eventually some poor bastard in the VT department just thinks, we're losing a lot of money here. I'm going to have to cut to commercials. Grade is watching this at home, and just as Hamlet runs his sword through the curtain, it cuts to a jingle for Wall sausages. And Grade is furious. He thinks this is exactly what everyone in the papers is waiting for. I'm going to get murdered tomorrow morning. So he picks up the phone and he dials some poor secretary and shouts, "What the fuck happened to Hamlet?" And the secretary pauses for a second and goes, "I think he dies at the end."
That's fantastic. I'd never heard that one before. I've definitely got to read that book now. That is fantastic.
Definitely. It's such a funny book.
I do remember, I have to throw in a very quick anecdote on Lou Grade, was when he was doing Jesus of Nazareth and they were worried about budget restraints. And there was a rumor going around that he was going to cut the disciples down from 12 to 6.
He's one of those guys, isn't he, who just, you can, like Sam Goldwyn, you can tell any story about Sam Goldwyn and people will believe it because the truth is always more outrageous.
Yeah. It's an utter mogul in the old-fashioned sense, as you say, proper sort of Barnum type There's the thing from Barnum through to Cecil B. DeMille and all that. It's all threaded through to Lou Grade, and there probably isn't going to be another one after that.
No, not at all. I think the biggest character we've had, like, in control of British television channel since then was Michael Grade, which doesn't quite feel like the same thing, really.
No, it's much more bureaucratic suit type version of his dad, really. Was his dad or his uncle? Might have his uncle, I think.
Yeah. I hadn't actually thought of that when you said it, but yes, of course, there's the family connection there.
I think it's his uncle. I think.
Yeah,
I think so.
But anyway,
I always get confused because it's Bill Cotton. Bill Cotton was chairman of the BBC, I think, or whatever, and Director General or something like that. I can't remember. But his dad was Billy Cotton, the band leader. So I know there's a dad and son dynamic in the BBC, but I don't think it's Lou Grade and Michael Grade. I think Lou Grade was Michael Grade's uncle, I think.
That is Billy Cotton being related to the Director General of the BBC. It's like the real life version of all those jokes that were circulating 10 years ago about how there's a David Miliband, an Ed Miliband, and then there's Glenn Miliband.
Glenn Miliband,
don't see him
Steve
much.
Miliband.
Yeah.
And see, we even end on a band. Because it's pop screen, we even end on a band.
Even our irrelevant puns are music themed. Yes.
We keep on target, don't worry. It doesn't sound like we do at times, but we do. We keep on target.
It's what's called being a pro.
Yep.
Well, like I say, check out Catch Us If You Can, listeners. It's a really fantastic film that really caught me by surprise.
Absolutely. I echo this completely. Please do. I don't feel like we've possibly done it justice because I've rabbited on a hell of a lot about all sorts of different things, including Ian Meats. So please don't take our ramblings as thingy. Just take the thing we were saying, which is this is a really interesting film. You should watch it.
Yes. But until next week, when Pop Screen returns, that's been your lot. I've been Graham.
And I've been Mark.
See you next week.